May 28, 1940 Reich Air Ministry, Berlin. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring lowered the latest intelligence briefing with open disdain. The report summarized President Roosevelt's appeal to Congress for an unprecedented aircraft production surge and American capacity of 50,000 planes a year. The Americans must be truly desperate if they think such propaganda will intimidate us, Göring scoffed to his aides. They understand nothing about war industry. Let them try converting their automobile plants. They will soon discover that building combat aircraft demands far more than simple assembly line work. What Göring failed to understand was that, in Detroit, a Danish immigrant named William Knudsen was already disproving his every assumption. The former General Motors president, now serving Roosevelt for $1 a year as America's chief production coordinator, was directing the most sweeping industrial transformation the world had ever seen. Within 4 years, U.S. factories would not only reach the supposedly impossible target of 50,000 aircraft but push toward 100,000 planes annually, all while supplying two major war fronts on opposite sides of the globe. The announcement that had provoked German ridicule came on May 16, 1940, as German panzer divisions tore through France. Addressing Congress, Roosevelt declared, "I should like to see this nation geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year." Even America's friends doubted it. In 1939, the United States had produced barely 3,611 military aircraft, and the Army Air Corps owned just 1,700 combat-ready planes, many outdated. Yet Roosevelt demanded a 14-fold increase. Knudsen became the engineer of this industrial miracle. When advisors debated who could possibly meet such a goal, Bernard Baruch replied, "First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen." Knudsen had abandoned a $300,000 salary to serve the country that had adopted him, bringing with him the techniques of mass automobile production and adapting them to aircraft manufacturing. The shift began immediately. By December 1941, U.S. factories were turning out 2,000 military aircraft each month, a 20-fold increase over 2 years. Ford announced a colossal bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing expanded its Seattle operations. Douglas Aircraft hired tens of thousands of new workers. The arsenal of democracy was stirring to life. Germany's dismissal of American capability arose from a toxic combination of racial arrogance and deliberate ignorance. General Friedrich von Boeticher, the Wehrmacht's military attaché in Washington from 1933 to 1941, sent detailed and accurate warnings about U.S. rearmament. His December 1940 cable predicted that American war production will reach unimaginable heights. Berlin discarded his reports as defeatist exaggeration. When Boeticher met with Hitler in February 1939 to discuss the United States, the Führer ranted about supposed American racial degeneration instead of listening to intelligence. Hitler insisted that Americans, half Judaized, half Negro, could not sustain a major war. This ideological blindness would become fatal. Prejudice clouded judgment throughout the Nazi command. Luftwaffe intelligence dismissed reports that American women were entering aircraft factories as merely signs of U.S. distress. They simply could not imagine a free society mobilizing more effectively than a dictatorship. When analysts received accounts of plants operating around the clock in 3 shifts, they assumed exaggeration. Nazism had no conceptual framework for understanding the American reality. The Ford Willow Run plant became the physical symbol of America's industrial audacity. Built on farmland beginning April 18, 1941, it grew into the world's largest factory under a single roof, 3.5 million square feet, with a mile-long assembly line. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, pledged to build one B-24 bomber per hour, at a time when other factories managed one per day. Early efforts were disastrous. The first bomber, completed in September 1942, had to be rebuilt entirely. Defect rates hit 50%. By February 1943, Willow Run delivered only 56 bombers per month, far short of expectations. Critics nicknamed it Will It Run? But Ford's engineers persevered. They broke down the B-24's 488,193 components into manageable subassemblies. They introduced hydraulic riveters, pre-made wiring harnesses, and moving assembly lines. In 1943 alone, they incorporated 578 design changes without halting output. Production climbed rapidly: 148 bombers in September, 365 in December. The decisive breakthrough came in April 1944, when Willow Run delivered 428 B-24s, one every 63 minutes, around the clock. One factory was now outproducing the entire German aviation industry. German airmen first grasped America's overwhelming industrial momentum in the Tunisia campaign. Major Johannes Steinhoff of JG-77 observed in December 1942, "The American pilots are no longer amateurs. But worst of all, there are more of them every day." The realization deepened through 1943. On January 27, the United States launched its first raid on Germany, 64 bombers striking Wilhelmshaven. By October, during Black Thursday at Schweinfurt, the U.S. lost 60 B-17s and replaced them in 2 weeks. The arithmetic had become unavoidable. During Big Week, February 20 to 25, 1944, the 8th and 15th Air Forces flew 3,500 bomber sorties against German aircraft production. The Luftwaffe lost between 262 and 355 fighters and, more crucially, around 100 veteran pilots, men who could not be replaced. General Adolf Galland reported to Goring that Germany was losing 1,200 aircraft monthly but producing only 1,000, while the U.S. produced 2,500 each month and lost only 400. Major Heinz Bahr, one of Germany's top aces with 220 victories, described a January 1944 mission near Brunswick. The bomber stream stretched from horizon to horizon, at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators. We were 8 fighters against hundreds. It was hopeless. By 1944, American aircraft output had reached staggering levels. That year alone, the United States produced 96,270 aircraft, including 16,048 four-engine bombers, 35,743 fighters, and 22,591 multi-engine aircraft. This single year surpassed Germany's entire wartime production of approximately 94,677 planes. The contrast extended far beyond raw numbers. American bombers carried 13.50 caliber machine guns with thousands of rounds. German fighters increasingly launched with partial ammunition loads. U.S. bombers had powered turrets, advanced bomb sights, and modern navigation gear. Many German fighters lacked even reliable radios. Seattle's Boeing Plant No. 2 produced 16 B-17s per day by May 1944. Douglas Aircraft grew from a 68-person company in 1936 to 167,000 workers across 9 plants. North American Aviation turned out 500 P-51 Mustangs each month. Lockheed delivered a P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes while implementing over 2,000 combat-driven modifications. Supporting industries kept pace. General Motors built 57,658 aircraft engines. Packard produced 55,523 Rolls-Royce Merlins. Alcoa boosted aluminum output by 600%. Dow Chemical's magnesium production grew from 6 million pounds a year to 333 million. The transformation of America's workforce demolished Nazi stereotypes. Women, only 1% of aircraft workers in 1941, made up 65% by 1943, totaling 310,000. At Douglas Long Beach, 10,238 of 14,162 employees were women. Roswell Monroe, later known as Rosie the Riveter, drove 3,000 rivets per shift at Willow Run with 99.5% accuracy. Women inspectors at Douglas reduced defect rates from 3.2% to 0.3%. Ford redesigned tools for smaller hands, improving efficiency without even intending to. German intelligence read female employment as a sign of U.S. collapse. A captured Luftwaffe report called these workers temporary fill-ins and predicted plunging quality. Instead, precision soared. Women excelled in fine detail tasks, wiring, instrumentation, inspection. Their contribution displayed not weakness but the core strength of democratic mobilization. As American production soared, Germany retreated into fantasy. Göring authorized the Jagger program in February 1944, dispersing production into 729 underground facilities using slave labor. The Middle Complex employed 60,000 prisoners in horrific conditions with 20,000 dying. These underground factories produced more defects than aircraft. Slave laborers sabotaged components. Transportation between dispersed facilities caused delays. Quality control collapsed. The entire Middlework complex produced fewer engines monthly than Ford's single Chicago plant. Meanwhile, American innovation accelerated. Boeing developed modular B-29 construction across 4 facilities with completely interchangeable parts. The pressurized B-29 costing $65,000 each incorporated technology Germany couldn't match in prototypes. By early 1945, America was producing 100 B-29s monthly. June 6, 1944 demonstrated the culmination of American production. The invasion employed 11,590 Allied aircraft against 319 German sorties, a 36-to-1 superiority. This wasn't tactical advantage, but industrial annihilation. Between January and May 1944, preparatory bombing dropped 145,000 tons on German targets, exceeding all German bombing of Britain throughout the war. Transport aircraft delivered 3 airborne divisions in one day using more planes than Germany's entire transport fleet ever possessed. By December 1944, single raids involved 1,200 bombers escorted by 900 fighters. P-51 Mustangs possessed range to reach Poland, performance to match any opponent, and existed in quantities making losses irrelevant. German pilots called them Indians, swarming everywhere simultaneously. As defeat approached, even Nazi leadership acknowledged the production catastrophe. In December 1944, Goebbels wrote in his diary, "Göring promises about Luftwaffe superiority now seem criminal delusions. We fight the world's greatest industrial power with rhetoric." RML told his staff before D-Day, "The Americans can lose 10 tanks for every one we destroy and still overwhelm us. When they land, they will come with such material superiority that no position can hold." Even Hitler admitted to Scheer in January 1945. "We should have listened to Bertika's reports, their industrial potential was decisive. While we built hundreds, they built tens of thousands." Albert Scharr later testified that American bombing reduced German production by 35% for tanks, 31% for aircraft, and 42% for trucks. He stated unequivocally, "The American attacks, which followed a definite system of assault on industrial targets, caused the breakdown of German armaments." Germany's M262 jet fighter operational mid-1944 represented genuine innovation 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied fighter. Hitler and Göring believed this wonder weapon could restore air superiority despite numerical inferiority. But Germany produced just 1,430 Mi-62s total with never more than 200 operational simultaneously. Engines required overhaul every 10 hours. Critical materials were unavailable, forcing inferior substitutions. America, meanwhile, had begun jet development in 1942. While the Bell P-59 proved inferior to German jets, Loheit's P-80 Shooting Star, superior to any German jet, entered production before war's end. American industrial depth allowed simultaneous pursuit of multiple technologies, a luxury Germany couldn't afford. The contrast epitomized the production war's outcome. Germany's technological superiority in jets meant nothing against America's ability to produce thousands of conventional fighters while simultaneously developing next-generation aircraft. Quality without quantity proved worthless in total war. Hermann Göring's arrest on May 8, 1945 by elements of the U.S. 36th Infantry Division marked the beginning of his confrontation with reality. Initially defiant at the interrogation facility in Augsburg, he maintained German technology had been superior, overcome only by numbers. His subsequent transfer to Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, the dedicated facility for high-ranking Nazi prisoners, brought intensive interrogation. In July 1945, Major Kenneth Heckler conducted extensive interviews documenting Göring's evolving recognition of American industrial superiority. "I knew American industrial potential was great," Göring admitted to Heckler. "But the execution exceeded my worst fears. That single factory at Willow Run produced more aircraft than our entire bomber force at peak. It was incomprehensible." He expressed particular astonishment at American logistics. "Your ability to supply forces across 2 oceans while maintaining domestic production. This was beyond our conception. We couldn't adequately supply forces 500 miles from Germany. You supplied armies 5,000 miles from America." During his trial at Nuremberg, prosecutors presented Göring with overwhelming evidence of American production superiority. Charts showed America producing more aircraft monthly by 1944 than Germany managed annually. Films of Willow Run's assembly lines played while prosecutors listed German cities destroyed by bombers from that single factory. Göring's March 14, 1946 testimony revealed his struggle to comprehend the scale. "I believe the economic and technical potential of the United States to be unusually great, particularly the Air Force. But I never imagined they could increase aircraft production 100-fold in 4 years. Such growth seemed physically impossible." Prison psychologist G.M. Gilbert documented Göring's obsession with production statistics. He repeatedly calculated ratios, comparing single American factories to entire German production. He seemed particularly fixated on Willow Run, calling it the damned factory that broke our backs. When shown that America had produced 812,615 aircraft engines versus Germany's 241,675, Göring simply stared at the figures in silence. The mathematical reality of defeat was undeniable. The transformation's scope remains staggering even today. From 3,611 military aircraft in 1940, America produced 295,959 by war's end, 97,810 bombers, 99,465 fighters, 98,684 others. This represented not just quantity, but systemic superiority in every aspect of production. 2 million Americans worked in aircraft production at peak, including unprecedented diversity. Women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, disabled workers, teenagers, and elderly citizens. This democratic mobilization achieved what totalitarian command could not: voluntary cooperation that exceeded forced labor's output by every metric. The workforce that entered factories in 1941, knowing nothing about aircraft, emerged in 1945 as the world's most skilled aviation workers. They didn't just build planes, they revolutionized manufacturing itself. Statistical quality control developed for bomber production became standard industrial practice worldwide. Automation principles pioneered at Willow Run transformed global manufacturing. The engineers who designed bomber assembly lines would design the Saturn V rocket. The women who riveted B-24s would raise children who walked on the moon. The production miracle didn't end with victory. It launched the American century. The financial dimensions defied economic orthodoxy. Aircraft production consumed $45 billion in 1940s dollars, equivalent to $800 billion today. The B-29 program alone cost more than the Manhattan Project. Yet rather than bankrupting America, war production created unprecedented prosperity. Unemployment, which had plagued the Depression decade, vanished completely. Personal income doubled between 1940 and 1945. War bond sales by workers themselves financed much of the expansion. Willow Run workers alone purchased $45 million in bonds funding their own Factos operations. Germany, conversely, consumed 40% of its entire industrial capacity for aircraft production by 1944, yet produced less than half American output. Slave labor, increasingly relied upon, proved catastrophically counterproductive. Sabotage was endemic. Quality collapsed. Productivity per German worker actually declined after 1943 while American productivity increased 300%. The production infrastructure built for war became the foundation for post-war prosperity. Aluminum smelters built for bombers produced materials for suburban housing. Chemical plants that made aviation fuel created plastics for consumer goods. Machine tool factories that equipped aircraft plants tooled up American industry for global dominance. Beyond raw production lay organizational excellence. The War Production Board coordinated 184,000 companies seamlessly. IBM punch card machines tracked millions of components across thousands of suppliers. MIT's Radiation Laboratory, employing 4,000 scientists, developed navigation systems that gave American bombers all-weather capability. When combat revealed B-17 vulnerability to frontal attacks, Boeing added chin turrets within 60 days. When Pacific operations required extended range, Consolidated modified B-24s without stopping production. German modifications took months or years. American improvements took weeks. This adaptability proved as decisive as production volume. American aircraft evolved continuously based on global combat experience. Information flowed from Pacific battles to Atlantic production lines within days. German aircraft produced in isolated underground facilities by slave labor remained static while American designs improved weekly. The feedback loop between combat and production achieved unprecedented efficiency. Pilots' observations reached engineers immediately. Engineers' solutions reached assembly lines within days. Assembly line workers' suggestions reached designers directly. This democratic flow of information proved superior to German hierarchical command. On October 15, 1946, hours before his scheduled execution, Hermann Göring wrote his final letter. In it, he made his most complete admission of the production war's significance. The Americans won through industrial power, not military prowess. We were not defeated by better soldiers, but by better factories. The nation we dismissed as capable only of building consumer goods buried the Wehrmacht under aluminum and steel. His last recorded statement to Gilbert was equally revealing. We declared war on an industrial giant while it slept. When it awoke, we were doomed. They didn't just outproduce us. They revolutionized production itself. Every aspect of their system proved superior to ours. Goring committed suicide that night, but his final testimony stands as history's verdict on the production war. The Reichsmarshal, who had dismissed American capabilities, died knowing a single American factory exceeded his entire Air Force's lifetime production. Military historians consider the American production achievement the decisive factor in Allied victory. Without the overwhelming material superiority it provided, D-Day would have been impossible. The bombing campaign unsustainable and the Pacific War unwinnable. Richard Overy, the leading historian of the Air War, concluded, the outcome was determined not by fighting spirit or tactical brilliance, but by the weight of material. The Allies won because they buried their enemies under an avalanche of production. The numbers support this assessment absolutely. By 1944, America alone was producing more military aircraft than the rest of the world combined. Axis and Allied. This was an incremental superiority, but order of magnitude dominance. Germany faced not defeat, but obliteration. Yet, the production miracle's significance transcended military victory. It proved democracy's superiority to dictatorship, freedom's advantage over tyranny, voluntary cooperation's strength over forced obedience. The people who carried out this industrial revolution were not coerced laborers or drafted workers, but free citizens united by a shared mission. Hermann Göring's rejection of America's manufacturing potential remains one of the most disastrous misjudgments in history. His scorn for the strength of a democratic industry helped lose Germany the war and cost countless lives. By failing to understand what American factories and workers could accomplish, Göring effectively sealed the fate of the Third Reich long before the first U.S. bomber appeared over Germany. The leap from producing 3,000 planes a year to nearly 100,000 proved that free nations, when confronted with a mortal threat, can accomplish feats that seem impossible. American labor didn't merely fulfill Roosevelt's audacious production goal, they exceeded it twofold. They didn't simply keep pace with German aircraft output, they surpassed it by a factor of 5 while simultaneously waging a vast war in the Pacific. Modern leaders would be wise to learn from Göring's mistake, assuming democracies are weak because they prefer peace, or underestimating the productive capacity of free citizens because they choose prosperity over conquest, leads to catastrophic miscalculations. In 1940, America looked unprepared for global conflict. By 1944, it had become an industrial giant of unstoppable power. The arsenal of democracy demonstrated that assembly lines could be just as decisive as battlefields, that factory laborers could contribute as critically as soldiers, and that industrial mobilization could shape victory as surely as battlefield strategy. Göring learned this truth only when it was far too late, at the cost of his nation's collapse. From the moment he scoffed at Roosevelt's 1940 announcement to his execution at Nuremberg in 1946, Göring's path reflected the downfall of Nazi Germany itself. His contempt for American manufacturing became a symbolic epitaph for a regime that confused ideology with real capability, mistook dictatorship for genuine power, and believed racial fantasies could override industrial arithmetic. The Reichsmarshal who mocked America's aircraft industry died knowing that U.S. factories had produced more planes in 1944 alone than Germany built during the entire war. His ridicule of democratic production became one of history's most expensive errors, paid for with complete military and political ruin. The United States ultimately produced 295,959 military aircraft, while Germany managed 94,677. Yet the true American triumph was not only numerical, it was philosophical. Free workers outperformed forced labor, democratic cooperation outmatched authoritarian command, and a nation of immigrants and diverse citizens united to accomplish what seemed unthinkable. The B-24 bombers rolling out of Willow Run every 63 minutes were more than machines, they were the embodiment of democracy's response to tyranny. Each rivet was placed by a woman who had been a homemaker only months earlier. Each engine was assembled by a teenager who had left school to serve the war effort. Each wing was crafted by workers who had escaped poverty or discrimination. Together, they proved that free people, united in a just cause, could overwhelm tyranny through sheer productive might. Goring once laughed at the suggestion that America could build 50,000 aircraft in a year. The United States answered by building twice that number, and in doing so, reshaped the course of world history. His laughter now echoes as a symbol of monumental miscalculation, the fatal error of a man who understood neither democracy nor industry. In the end, he and everything he represented were buried beneath the nearly 300,000 aircraft that turned his contempt into one of history's most complete defeats.